I have to start all over because I started talking, but didn't unmute my mic and I didn't unmute my video. Welcome back to the lecture hall on this fine Sunday, everybody. You'll have to forgive me. I'm a one-man show. I make human errors. This is Dr. Julius Doyle. For those of you who are new here, the lecture hall is an ongoing public series where we take a deep dive into history, race, culture, politics, and society, particularly through an anthropological lens. Over the course of this series, we've been working our way through the timeline of U.S. history to better understand how we arrived at the world we inhabit today. My goal isn't simply to teach dates and events, but to examine the relationship between them, to understand how institutions, ideas, policies, and people have shaped the society that we live in and what that means for our future. Now, for everyone joining me on Instagram Live, welcome. If this is your first time, if you'd like to follow along with the lecture slides that I'm discussing, you can click the link in my bio. You can join us on Zoom, absolutely free. Not only will you be able to see the slides in full, but you'll also have the opportunity to interrupt me, ask questions, participate in the discussion if you want to. If you'd like to access the slides without my head blocking half the screen, you can also join my Patreon, where I make the presentation materials available to supporters, but also people for free. And I want to be clear. These lectures and educational materials are available free of charge, okay? Patreon does a thing where it tries to trick you into paying me. Now, if you want to give me money, if you want to financially support me, I will not turn that money away. But I do not require that in order for you to have access to these materials, okay? Education should be accessible. Patreon is simply a way for those who wish to financially support this work, to help sustain it, and to make future lectures possible, but also to have access to the materials. For those of you who are watching on this pre-recorded version via YouTube, thank you for spending your time with me. If you find these conversations valuable, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, sharing these lectures with your family and friends and colleagues and communities. It's the best way that this network is going to grow is through word of mouth. And with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to the lecture hall. So, where we left off, what we were talking about last week. We were talking about many things. We were talking about how World War II gave Black people this awakening, this new social experience, the ability to reflect on what it means to actually be an American and for their home country to live up to its self-proclaimed values. Okay? Isn't that interesting? We talked about the double standard of fighting for freedoms that other people will have that you won't have at home. We talked about the rise of the fear of communism and how advocacy for changes to social norms becomes a thing where in the minds of many conservative-minded oriented or politically oriented people, they can't distinguish people who are exercising their First Amendment right from those who are communists and truly are or could be a threat to national security, and how those values, those anti-communist sentiments, beliefs, and values get normalized today. Okay? And we've been going through the timeline of American history. For those of you who don't know, we started with pre-colonial Africa. We went all the way through the legacy of slavery. We cover this all in totality. We've been going from, I want to say about the 16 or 1700s. And now we are finally at the point where we're hitting the 1900s. We're in 1950s right now. That's where we're at. Okay? So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get started. Okay? So, just a little bit of a refresher. We are post-World War II. And being post-World War II here means that even in the midst of the Cold War, you have American life taking on a kind of new culture norm. And that culture norm is one in which there is like unparalleled prosperity. For those of you who might be politically familiar with this concept of people excuse me, a president's policies really having like downstream effects, like the visible effects of their policies you won't really see until the next 15 to 20 years after they leave office. right? Well, in the context of the 1950s, the unparalleled prosperity that we're seeing in American life with the multi-bedroom house, the garden outside, the white picket fence, the chocolate lab, that like nuclear family style of American culture, is coming from the downstream effects of FDR's policies. So what's interesting, I know I like to pivot away for a second, but I want to kind of make the connection for you. And the connection here that I want you to make is, I like to think personally that when some conservatives who fall prey to Donald Trump's lies and political manipulation and truth distortion and things like that, when they say make America great again, a lot of these people, although racism and white supremacy is an inseparable and ineffable part of their political identity, what they really want and what they're calling great is this era in American times, or in this timeline of American history, when you could afford a home, when you could have a 2 or 3 person family, sustain that on one line of income. Things were calm for the most part. Things were, so quote unquote, peaceful for white people for the most part. It seems like they're pointing to this era. And what's ironic is that the benefits that gave rise to this era came from the progressive policies of FDR, not conservative policies of kick them out, I got mine, fuck you, go get yours, I'm going to keep mine, you stay out of my neighborhood, you go this way, you don't have the same rights as me. That's not what gave rise to this. Okay? So what's interesting here is that even in the minds, I would like to say, again, this is an opinion, but I would like to think that even in the minds of conservative-minded people who want to hearken back to this specific era of American life, they're pointing to an era that was created from progressive policies and progressive policymaking. Something to think about. Again, I preface that with it's an opinion. Be able to distinguish opinion from fact. I don't know. Maybe you disagree with me, maybe you do. Getting back to this point, though, this is a period in time in which FDR's policies were so goddamn effective that you could support an entire family on one income. If you recall, just 15 to 20 years prior, Americans, by and large, were in unprecedented poverty. They were struggling. People were starving. There were numerous families that were huddled together in under the same roof because they couldn't afford to survive. And FDR, the only thing that FDR really had going for, or excuse me, not FDR, excuse me, Hoover. The only thing that Hoover had going during the Great Depression was pick yourselves up by your bootstraps. Those are the conservative policies, right? Pick yourselves up by your bootstraps. That's not what created this. Okay? This time period where homes are incredibly cheap. They're being made, like constructed, right? You can buy a home for $6,000, $10,000. $25,000 is excessive during this period in time. And then, in addition to owning that home, you can save money too. You can build wealth. You can accumulate that wealth from the ownership of that home, perhaps pass on that wealth to your generation. Now you have intergenerational transfers of wealth, right? And what's interesting is that this unparalleled point in American history and society is really only afforded to white people. Okay, so it's never the case. I know some of you, even as old as I am, I'm only 35. I'm about to be 36 next week. Okay, but some of you are older than me, especially the ones who are regularly coming to these sessions. You listen in. You guys are older than me, so I know you remember the Jetsons. I know you remember the Flintstones. I know you remember all of this period, the culture and the cartoons and the norms that came out of the 1950s and 60s. And I know that you can think of any era, any image, any artistic depiction of this era, And the only thing you will consistently find, yep, Tom and Jerry, Song of the South, absolutely, right? The only thing you will consistently find is a depiction of white people living this lifestyle. Now, in Tom and Jerry, thank you, Michael, for bringing up Tom and Jerry, because I wanna like use this as an example, right? In Tom and Jerry, they never showed the adults' faces, like ever. And when they did show the adults, you saw their feet. And whenever it was a black person's feet, they always had the like polka dot spotted maid outfit, the uniform. They were like, the mammy was always talking to Tomcat or Jerry Mouse, right? Anytime they're in or surrounded by white people, that's where you have like a white person who represents the class of this period, right? Okay. And that's not on accident. It's, to an extent, they're trying to be true to life, is that black people are being intentionally and deliberately withheld from access to this kind of lifestyle, right? So even though you have like a spillover of most of FDR's policies, the benefits, the SNAP benefits, the Social Security, the welfare, the retirement programs, all of that stuff, most of those benefits, including down payments on homes, we talked about redlining, how residential redlining led to a modern gap in home ownership and wealth accumulation rates for people by race. Okay, that's what this is doing. Is most of these benefits are going to white people. Okay, so once World War II is over, once the all hands on deck context of society is over, and there really isn't a pressing need for churning out as many guns, ammunition, rations, planes, uniforms, medicines, things like that, then they start to cut back on the jobs that are extended to these kinds of people in these sectors. And who are the first people to get fired? The first people axed are black people, are brown people, are the non-white people. So it creates a deliberate phenomenon that is happening. And by the time we get to a few slides from now, you'll see that it is very deliberate, is that what's being afforded, the lifestyle that is being extended to certain kinds of people, really is just fundamentally dependent on their skin color. If they are white, they will keep their job. If they're black or brown, well, good luck. We don't need you anymore. We're scaling back. Good luck finding a job somewhere else, which means that a lot of black people and brown people during this time have to turn back to domestic labor, have to turn back to the low social hierarchy status positions. Okay? Then on top of that, you have white Americans who are almost uniquely and ubiquitously accessing these benefits that are then forming what are called residential covenants amongst themselves, where over the course of years, and I'm kind of glossing history here because it's very hard to talk about history in its minute details, but over the course of time that we had established residential redlining, you had where black people were trying to push against the legality of being able to racially segregate in housing, in apartments, in specific neighborhoods. And because the NAACP during this time was very effective at arguing the constitutionality of a lot of these Jim Crow laws, the Supreme Court had effectively outlawed residential redlining. So nowhere on a sheet of paper can it explicitly say, or anywhere can you say whites only. No blacks, no niggers, no Irish, no Mexicans. You cannot explicitly say that. But if you, white homeowner with a picket fence and a chocolate lab, and your neighbor just casually agree that you'll never sell your homes to niggers, that you'll never sell your homes to the Spics or the Japs or the Chinks, no matter what, they don't get into this neighborhood, then you can collaboratively work together to build your own wealth by keeping the undesirables out. Okay? And in keeping them out, that because everybody knows the moment that a black family moves into the neighborhood, the property value of the entire neighborhood is going to sink, because the value of these homes, the value of these properties is defined and signified by the absence of people of color. That's even how it is today. That in any given American neighborhood, a home is only worth more if there are no or few people of color in it or in the neighborhood. Okay, so these people, you can't challenge the constitutionality of people making casual agreements never to sell to the people who will symbolically and literally bring down the value of a neighborhood so they can just agree. And so what happens then is they use coded language to describe the culture of the community. Maybe this is a gated community, it's a protected community. Maybe it's a community with a homeowners association, where the homeowners association has like strict rules and regulations about who can move into the neighborhood and what you can and can't do to your home, right? So this is how you get into this phenomenon where by the 1950s, most nuclear families in American life are they're homeowners. They live in houses. The people who then grow up as children in these houses generally inherit the houses or inherit the wealth that is generated from these houses. They then pass on that wealth to their children and to their children's children and so on and so forth. You end up in 2026 where there are certain people today who are still inheriting the wealth that was generated from this period in which pretty much everyone was collaboratively working together to make sure that black people could not have access to this life, even if they served in the military, even if they got approved for a down payment on a mortgage due to the GI Bill. They're never going to get access to this. Okay. So that's how you get there. Well, as we already talked about, black people, by the time they're even coming back from Europe, World War II is over. Now they realize that the fighting in Europe doesn't necessarily stop. The battle just looks a little different. We're not going to take up arms. We're not shooting people down. We're not, launching missiles and shooting rockets in the streets and things like that. But there's still a fight here at home, and that fight is around equality. The equality they've always wanted and they're entitled to by virtue of being Americans, American citizens, and that's guaranteed to them through the Constitution. So you have black people who are deliberately and diligently working to put the sharpest minds possible together to draft or craft the absolute airtight legal arguments for the constitutionality of challenging racial segregation. And in 1954, one of the most culture defining moments was the Supreme Court's ruling regarding Brown versus Board of Education. Because essentially what happens here is, we already talked about Thurgood Marshall kind of leading the forefront with the NAACP in challenging Jim Crow segregation, right? And essentially in challenging Jim Crow segregation on a constitutionality basis, it just becomes a thing where the arguments you're making are like cookie cutter. And that because the Supreme Court has to be consistent in how they protect and uphold the Constitution, it becomes really easy to just kind of chip away at every cornerstone of racial segregation and its offspring legacies that exist in American society. Okay? So essentially here, once you get to Brown versus Board of Education, it's unconstitutional for schools to racially segregate too. And because of that, that means that even states or public schools, which are schools that are funded by the state and the local government, they cannot facilitate state-sanctioned segregation anymore. Okay? So what's happening here is the NAACP is essentially hitting home run after home run after home run with more or less the same swing. Okay? And they're very effective at attacking the legal foundations of racial inequality. And this is upsetting a lot of culturally conservative, politically conservative, white only minded people, is that they don't like it when their neighborhoods can't stay all white, when their restaurants can't stay all white, now their schools can't stay all white, now their kids are forced to go to school with niggers, now they have to live in the same neighborhood with niggers, now they have to share the same bus with niggers. Why? No, this is unprecedented because their cultural way of life is based on the racial segregation that has always been for like the last 200 years by this point. And I'm estimating, I'm rounding, but you get my point. So this isn't just, I know from our perspective and in retrospect, we can look at these people, they're all wearing sharp suits. Look at them, they're fitted, they're sharp, they're brilliant minded people. But when white America during this time is looking at them, they're disgusted, they're angered, they're pissed off. And here's what's happening. You start getting black people who are able to make their way into avenues and opportunities for success. You have Constance Baker Motley, for example, who really wanted to go to law school. She grew up to immigrant parents from the British West Indies. They migrated to the US. So she is a descendant of migrants, okay? Raised in the United States and always wanted to go to law school because she was actually inspired by the black people who she grew up watching consistently challenge racial segregation in American society. Now, because she is the descendant of black and or brown people from the Caribbean who are immigrants to the United States during a time in American history where black people do not have access to equal opportunities no matter what. She wanted to go to law school, but she couldn't afford it. Her parents couldn't afford it. Somehow she ended up grabbing the attention of a white philanthropist and pro-racial equalist, if you will, by the name of Clarence Blakesley, who essentially said, okay, you want to go to law school? All right, I see you. I got you. He basically funded her entire collegiate career. She earned a bachelor's in economics, later went on to get a JD, and then ends up contributing to the efforts that Thurgood Marshall is making on this front. So this is what happens when the doors of opportunity just open up, is it doesn't really take that long for other people to fill in those spaces and then to make of life what they're going to make of it. Doesn't take multiple generations. It doesn't take pushing down a brick wall after brick wall after brick wall and trying and fighting and exhausting yourself, and maybe the next generation will get there. All it really takes is just a door being opened. So by 1945, here's Constance, Thurgood Marshall, and they're taking on hundreds of court-martialed cases. Okay? And I want to point something out to you, is that the story of Constance Baker Motley being a black woman who gets access to law school and then contributes to the effort that Thurgood Marshall was making and had been making all while she was growing up is exemplary of something called the gardener's allegory. I'm going to show you a video of this on the next slide. Okay? But before we get to that video, I want to read this quote. It says, "Nothing in Southern lawyers' background could have prepared them for Connie. To them, Negro women were either mammies, maids, or mistresses. None of them ever dealt with a Negro woman on a peer basis, much less a level of intellectual equality." And that goes for lots of Americans, white Americans during this time period. As I told you on the last slide, just looking at the wide shot of these black lawyers who are somehow like effectively knocking down all of our culture norms that we've had around racial segregation does nothing but piss them off, because they don't see sharp-minded, highly intelligent people, they see mammies, maids, mistresses, Sambos, Jim Crow himself is what they see. But getting back to the story of Connie, her story exemplifies something that I want you to see in this is called a gardener's tale or a gardener's allegory, and this is an allegory that was made by Kamara Phyllis Jones. Okay, and she is essentially describing what happens when Black people or people who are historically marginalized are simply given the opportunities that they wouldn't have otherwise been given. Okay, watch this video really quickly. I think in the volume here, the volume on this video is low. So I'm just forewarning you, if you hear it sounds like it's low volume, it might not actually be my computer, okay? But let's watch this, and then on the other end, we'll talk about it.
A Gardener's Tale, an allegory for racism, an adaptation for Kamara Phyllis Jones allegory by Alex, Brittany, Courtney, Helen, and Lindsay, illustrated by Brittany. Once upon a time ago, there was a gardener. She and her husband had recently bought a brand new house with 2 large flower boxes on the porch. The box on the left was empty, while the box on the right was full of old rocky soil. The gardener decided to go buy some new potting soil for the empty box, but left the box on the right full of the poor rocky soil that it had already had. While at the store, the gardener also bought 2 packets of seeds. They were both the same type of flower, but one packet would bear pink blossoms while the other would bloom red. The gardener loved the red flowers and has always preferred them to the pink. She planted the red seeds in the flower box with the new rich potted soil, and she planted the pink seeds in the poor rocky soil. Soon enough, the red flowers began to sprout, grow up, and flourish. The fittest of the red flowers in the rich soil grew full, vigorous, and strong. Even the weakest made it to a middling height. But the box with the poor rocky soil looked much different. The weak among the pink seeds didn't make it, and the strongest among them grew only to a middling height. In time, the flowers in the boxes went to seed and dropped their progeny into the same soil in which they had been growing. The next year, the same things happened. The red flowers in the rich soil grew full, vigorous, and strong. The pink flowers yet again struggled to survive. These flowers went to seed, and year after year, the cycle repeated itself. One day, a giant gust of wind blew a pink seed from the pink box into the red box. The gardener saw this and immediately ran to the porch and stopped the seed from entering the red box. Another year passed, and the pattern of strong, beautiful red flowers as compared to weak and scrawny pink flowers became more and more entrenched. That spring, a bee came along to pollinate the pink flowers. The pink flowers panicked and shouted, "Stop! Don't bring me any of the pink pollen. I prefer the pollen of the red." 10 years later, the gardener came back to survey the garden. When she looked at the 2 boxes, she remarked, "I was right to prefer the red to pink. Look how vibrant and beautiful the red flowers are, and how pitiful and scrawny the pink ones are."
Okay, so in this allegory, what you're looking at is, yes, it's about flowers. And the gardener thinks that the red flowers are superior to the pink flowers, so she treats them better. Meanwhile, the pink flowers are struggling to survive. You're essentially looking at a parallel of what racism in American life actually looks like. Is that all you have to do is, it's actually not that the pink flowers are somehow inferior to the red, but rather that if they're given nutrient-rich soil, if they're given the opportunity, the resources to grow and sustain themselves, they can grow and thrive and be just as beautiful and rich and pollen-rich for the bees as the red flowers, right? And so, of course, in this allegory, it seems kind of silly. Like, what kind of stupid gardener would really think that doing this it means that the red flowers are better? The gardener sounds almost like an idiot until you realize that that's how most people treat people of color in American society, is create the conditions necessary to cultivate a stressful, struggle-rich, arduous life, and lifestyle for them that they have no choice but to pass on to their children, and then internalize this belief that because they're sitting in positions of impoverishment or oppression of some kind, that somehow means that that's where they belong, that's what they deserved, right? And if they just pick themselves up by their bootstraps, right? So getting back to the story of Constance Baker Motley, then, for Constance Baker Motley, it's really just this example of you have people who are internalizing this idea that poor or impoverished Black people are like intellectually inferior. They don't deserve the same access to opportunities. They can't make significant contributions. They shouldn't share space or be considered to be equal or of equal footing to the white people surrounding them, right? Meanwhile, if you really just give them the opportunity to grow, like in Constance Baker Motley's case, all she needed was the resources and the opportunity to do it. And given the opportunity to do it, she was successful, right? So I want you to think about this, not just in the case of the 1950s, but even just today. Where are the patterns of inequality that still exist in American society? What do you think the solution is for cultivating a better, safer, more support-oriented environment that then produces people who can thrive in American society? And no matter what solution you come up with to produce that outcome, in the political context, you will always be describing what we characterize as a progressive solution, because the solution isn't rooted in keeping things the same, aka conservatism. Okay, so keep that in mind. Okay, but now back to the Brown versus Board of Education ruling, because as I said, there are a bunch of white people who are really pissed off. Okay, eventually the Brown versus Board of Education ruling is essentially like the nail in the coffin. And the nail in the coffin here being that essentially, like, you cannot racially segregate anywhere in public. Okay, so almost like the Brown versus Board of Education ruling was like the nail in the coffin for Jim Crow laws. Okay, because essentially then if you can't racially segregate in your public institutions, then you can't really segregate in the unique ways that they practice service to the public. Okay, so then you're going to see desegregation in work, desegregation in marriage, desegregation in housing, desegregation in death burial. Yes, even cemeteries were always racially segregated. I could go into a whole other tangent about the logic around why people didn't want to bury their dead next to those that they deemed inferior, but we'll save that for another conversation. If you want to ask me about it at the end of lecture during the Q&A, then you're welcome to do that. Okay? Now, how do you think that's going to go? Culturally speaking, do you think white America is going to go, oh, okay, well, yeah, you know, like, we were being mean, we're kind of like the assholes, and, you know, we could all just sing Kumbaya now? That's not going to happen, right? Okay, so essentially you have white America that is trying. They don't care about a Supreme Court ruling. They don't care that Black people somehow now, because you wrote on a piece of paper that Black people get to be treated equally in society, that we're going to start doing that. They don't give a fuck. Okay, so essentially the Supreme Court then has to make a second ruling. They have to make a second ruling, which is commonly known as Brown 2. Brown 2 being short for Brown versus Board of Education Part 2. Right? And it is addressing the practicality of like going about desegregating society. And so in their ruling, they use this language where they say that states have to begin prompt compliance with all deliberate speed. Now, to a white supremacist who has absolutely no interest in following this ruling whatsoever, you can try to bend the interpretation of the language here. All deliberate speed. All deliberate speed does not mean yesterday. Doesn't mean today. It doesn't even mean tomorrow. It just says you got to make progress. Because what does that mean? 1 mile an hour, technically, is speed, just like 50 miles per hour, right? Okay? So what happens is there is a racial divergence in the interpretation of this language here, where black people interpret all deliberate speed to be immediately, do it now. But most white Americans, indeed, the white Americans I'm talking about here are politically conservative white Americans, are interpreting this to mean take a long time or even fucking never. Because essentially, all deliberate speed could essentially mean we're getting there. We're gonna get there. We're moving there. Just hold on. It's coming. And then you just keep saying that. And you keep saying that. And you keep saying that. And essentially, you can always assure that you're moving with all deliberate speed when no progress is being made at all. Okay? So now this is causing racial conflict in the 1950s, is even the language of Brown versus Board of Education, which is saying everybody has to desegregate with all deliberate speed. And there are white people who are willing to interpret this to mean don't fucking move at all. How does that work? Well, legal jargon, right? The legal arguments are always about the language of the bill, the language of the legislation, and what that means in your interpretation of that language. So you can see here how there is a kind of political divergence happening that is symbolized by the, let's say, the shallow level phenotypic traits that we associate with this thing we call race. Okay? And that's what's happening. Now, by this time period, FDR phased out. We're talking about Dwight D. Eisenhower being president of the United States during this time period. Okay? And he's upset because culturally, politically, he's conservative, and he does not want to put his office behind the enforcement of this Supreme Court ruling that says that American society has to desegregate with all deliberate speed. I don't know everything about Dwight D. Eisenhower's history, but I do know that he grew up in racial isolation. He did not grow up having to share space with black people at all. And so in his cultural upbringing, he understood that to not be white was a problem, that being white granted him the fortune and the benefits that came with being an upstanding American citizen, and that the races ought to remain segregated. Now, later, Dwight D. Eisenhower would eventually change his mind. We'll get to how that happens. Okay? But for now, he doesn't actually want, as president of the United States and a U.S. military veteran, he does not want to enforce desegregation at all. So regardless of this, you did have certain states, okay, Kentucky, Delaware, Oklahoma, Missouri, etc., that are desegregating anyway. And in desegregating, that means that, yes, they're pulling down their signs, they're redesigning their services and their buildings in such a way that they don't facilitate racial segregation anymore. It means that you're concentrating people of various racial identities into the same services or the same rooms or the same places of opportunity or transaction, okay? And even though southern states, northern states are moving forward in accordance with this, you still have white people who are really pissed off. It actually triggers both a social resistance as well as a political resistance. So even though I'm talking about Dwight D. Eisenhower not necessarily being happy about this, I think in its more blunt forms of resistance, we're literally talking about like white people finding themselves growing more and more conservative, developing more and more racial animosity, where you did have white people who may have been politically in the middle to identify as moderates. The moderate pool of white people is quickly shrinking. And what is growing is more white people identifying as like extremists or embodying extremism, taking radical action to resist racial integration. Okay? And a lot of the rhetoric that you will find in in these circumstances are essentially they're white hysteria. They're scared. Oh my God, they're going to replace you. Oh my God, they're going to come after you. They're going to get racial retribution if you let them into your spaces. If you have to share spaces with them, some of these people, they don't know how to keep up with their cleanliness. If they step in, you have to share a fork because you ordered a slice of pie in your favorite diner, well, good luck. You better not go into your favorite diner anymore without wearing a hazmat suit or something like that. There are white people who genuinely don't even want to share a fork that they know might have been used by a nigger, even though that fork might have been cleaned numerous times over. That's how, like, oh my God, this is icky. It's disgusting. Oh, we don't really want to share space. Oh, how you live is not appropriate and blah, blah, blah. And the resistance becomes more than just emotional sentiments. You have ministers like Jerry Falwell, for example. This is where American Christianity starts to like significantly overlap like politics again, right? Is you have like people who truly believe that their version of the religion that they practice is like the version that the rest of the world needs to follow. And what ends up happening is it consolidates white supremacy into a theocracy. It consolidates the ideas of white supremacy into something that elicits divine favor from God or from the Almighty. Because then you have ministers like Jerry Falwell, for example, who's preaching that like black people are the son of Ham and they're destined to be servants because Ham was cursed by God. And because black people are the son of Ham, this means that they belong enslaved. They belong in places where they are giving domestic help, where they're never seen as equal to white people. You have white conservative politicians like Senator Sam Ervin Jr., for example, as well as like 96 other Southern congressmen, not just him, who are like, they are writing in their decrees. They have like these manifestos where they're reading them out loud, either on a debate stage or in the halls of Congress, that they are going to fight to preserve segregation and the Southern way of life. Now, I don't use the language way of life accidentally. They are literally saying they are going to fight to preserve their way of life because they're part of their cultural identity is built on this idea that non-white people do not get equal opportunities and equal access to the same resources, places, amenities, and benefits that white people get. That is their cultural identity. And if you look back in history up until now, you will find that where white people in America could have carved out an actual legitimate culture for themselves, what they ended up doing was developing a culture around keeping non-white people out. Accordingly, by the time you get to the 1950s, then, the only thing that these white people know to be their culture is that black people and brown people don't get equal rights. That's what they're calling their culture. That's what they're preserving here. Fast forward to 2026, where you still have white people, conservative identifying white people, who are talking about preserving traditional or culture norms in some sense, to preserving the significance of what it means to be white in America. And if you press them on it, I think this was literally done at one point in Congress by a congressional body to approve a Trump-appointed person. I forget his name, but if you go back in the history of my IG timeline, I'm usually putting Patrick Starr next to his face. I've already forgotten this guy's name. He's getting pressed. What is white culture? What does it mean to be white in American society? He can't define it. He's struggling to define it. But in the logic of his words, the only thing he can really muster to articulate is that non-white people don't get the same benefits. That's it. That's literally it. So when we're talking about, like, if you ask this question, what is white culture in American life or in American society? If you press a conservative on that, if you press a white person who identifies as conservative or conservative leaning or oriented or something like that, get them to identify the hallmarks of what they're calling white culture. The only thing that they will ever consistently articulate is that non-white people do not get the same rights as them. And as I'm saying this to you, that has merit. That is the truth. The truth is in the answer. The truth is the culture that they carved out for themselves was the culture of keeping other people out. Fast forward to 2026 with people who live nowhere near the southern border, but are like, all of their attention is, oh my God, open borders and letting in illegal immigrants and kick them out and deport them and put them in cages and lock them up, get ICE over there, shoot them in the streets. They don't get access to the same opportunities. I have a video that I've been meaning to respond to of Charlie Kirk literally talking to a Mexican identifying person, I think. And he literally just says, you are not equivalent. You are not an equivalent. You are not equal to me. You don't get the same rights as me. That's literally, isn't that the whole point of, like, the people we're calling racists, the people we're calling assholes in American society, the people who we know to be the bad guys? Even the conservatives today don't want to really affiliate themselves with the white supremacists of yesteryear, because we know without a doubt those were the racists. They were saying the same things. You don't get the same rights as me. You don't get the same equal access. No. And that's their resistance. That's the whole political movement here. So now we have senators who are going in front of cameras, in front of microphones, in the halls of Congress, okay? And they're arms in arms, not just with other political leaders, but also with businessmen, with white-collar professionals, with members of the clergy, okay? The same people who we're saying, all those hooded Klansmen who I at one point told you, some of them are lawyers, some of them are doctors, some of them are police officers, some of them are members of society, some of them are white trash, but they represent a consolidation of every position that a white person can occupy on the socio-economic hierarchy. Well, it's the same thing here. The only difference is the mask is off right now. So you have businessmen, professionals, lawyers, doctors, policemen, politicians, white trash even, that are like organizing white citizens councils. Almost like their version of the NAACP, but I guess we would call it the WAACP. Or wait, the NOP, NAAWP, that's what it would be. Michael says, New York has civil service exams and is much better run state for everyone than Alabama, where you get a government job by being a white graduate from a University of Alabama. I did not know that to be true. Interesting. How is that constitutional? I mean, I'll take your word for it, but I'm curious to know of the merit of this claim that in Alabama, you just have to be a white graduate from the University of Alabama in order to get a job in the government. When I moved, it was obvious. Interesting. I've never heard of that. Okay. Okay. Well, so in these white citizens councils, they're trying to do the same thing that the NAACP is doing, but they're trying to preserve the South's sacred heritage freedom, the freedom to discriminate, the heritage and the cultural identity that comes with discriminating against non-white people, of oppressing them, perhaps even lynching them. Okay, so when you go to the South and you see those Confederate flag waving people and they're like, oh, heritage, not hate, that language is on purpose. It's not accidental. It's not coincidental. The heritage they're talking about is the heritage of a cultural identity that is distinguished. It is marked by oppressing you. You don't get the same rights. That's my culture. Does that sound like a culture to you? Right? Okay. So they tried intimidating black people. They tried resisting in whatever ways they could. If it was a landlord who was a member of this white citizens council, maybe they're evicting people from their apartments, black people. Maybe if you're a business owner, a white business owner who's fed up with these black people who are somehow getting all these equal rights in American society now, and you're an employer to one, maybe you fire them. Maybe you evict them. Maybe you refuse them a mortgage or something like that. Okay? So now white people, in whatever limited power that they have access to in society, they are then going to use that limited power to abuse it in a way that reinforces the status quo, discriminates against the black person, destabilizes them, marginalizes them, pushes them out, and then goes, why are you so poor? Pick yourself up by your bootstraps. You're not working hard enough. But no, you can't have this mortgage. But no, you can't move into this neighborhood with me. No, you can't have access to the school. No, you cannot have access to this decent paying job. Fuck you. Pick yourself up by your bootstraps. And then this becomes the song of not just the South, but of conservatism moving forward. That they're still saying the same shit in 2026. Nothing has changed. Such is conservatism, by the way it even names itself. It is to conserve. It does not change. So it will not change. So now juxtapose 2026 to 1955, and does it look any different? On that political front, absolutely not. It looks exactly the same. In fact, I would say it's becoming more and more akin to 1955. Now that we got people like Jake Lang, I don't know, grabbing everybody's attention, even though he keeps getting beat up. People go out and punch him and push him and kick him around, and then you're justifying why he feels that way every time you swing your fist at him. I don't know. Get a chair. Okay, anyway. So this massive white resistance, it's growing. And it's not just deliberate, intentional, shallow, but it's growing into like a full-blown cultural movement. Is even the white people who are on the fence are starting to find that they feel like maybe, no, we need to start resisting. We need to keep racial segregation in place. So now this is where the NAACP starts coming under fire, because ultimately, in the context of everything big here that's happening, they're kind of holding the smoking gun. They're the ones that kind of chipped away at racial segregation across the South and indeed across the rest of America. And they've been deliberately trying to wipe out racial segregation from existence here. So now, who are these white citizens councils, Citizens United? Who are they attacking now? They're attacking NAACP chapters. Okay. By 1957, you had 9 southern states that are trying to file a lawsuit to identify the NAACP with being like communists. They're like communist sympathizers. And the reason why they're communist sympathizers, is because they are actually making monumental change in American society that is undermining the foundations of racial segregation in our way of life. Okay? And because they're undermining racial segregation, how can you distinguish that from communism? Isn't that communism? The commies, hello, the Red Scare. The Soviet propaganda that comes in and calls America out on all of its hypocrisy. It's got to be wrong. And if these people are advocating for fair change in American society, then they must be communists. So this whole communist witch hunt that's going on in American life, despite the fact that we have a First Amendment during this time period, it's actually effective. It makes it so that, like, in the minds of a lot of other people, the NAACP is no different from a communist propaganda organization. And they just happen to be the most influential communists on the political front. So American political efforts start to try to undermine the NAACP, which makes the membership plummet from roughly a 6-figure number to a 5-figure number. The NAACP loses nearly 250 branches. And even though by 1958 you had maybe 13 schools that desegregated, by 1960 maybe 17 did, that's about it. So it is a collaborative resistance effort to conserve the status quo. And in conserving the status quo, that means that even though the Supreme Court says we have to change and we have to move with all deliberate speed, no the fuck we don't. Make us. Because at the end of the day, my freedom, individual freedom, means that I have the freedom to affiliate with whoever the fuck I want to, and I don't want to affiliate with niggers. So I'm not going to, even if the Supreme Court says I should or that I have to. That is the mindset of these people at this point in time. And it doesn't stop there. It isn't just, we're going to close the doors, we're going to kick you out, we're going to fire you, we're going to resist at all costs. It isn't just that. It's also killing black people too. Killing innocent black people. That you have to make a statement that when you say my cultural identity is you don't get the same rights as me, that also means that I can fucking lynch your ass and no justice, no amount of judicial process. There isn't a police investigation. There's nothing is going to come after us for killing you too. And that's the way things ought to be. Such is the way of conservatism. And conservatism reacting to progressive change means not only do you have to resist, but you have to reinforce the status quo. So here you have Emmett Till. And Emmett Till is this young 14-year-old boy who's visiting his family in the South. I think from Chicago, could have been Detroit. I forget, my memory is shoddy here. But anyway, he's visiting from the North in the South. And what is alleged to have happened, there's many versions of this story, is he's in Mississippi, the state that's currently getting all of the attention right now around Nolan Wells. And then I just recently heard the lynching of this other young black woman. Is Emmett Till goes into a grocery store where a woman whose last name is Bryant, I forget her name, Carolyn Bryant, that's it, and allegedly said, "Bye, baby." Some other versions of the story is that somebody dared him to say "bye, baby" to her. Maybe he whistled at her like a kind of thing. Maybe he kind of sniveled at her and was like a wink, "I want you" kind of wink, like a seductive wink. Either way, he's allegedly said something to seduce Carolyn Bryant, who was the wife of the owner of the store. So before we get to the subsequent events of the story, I want to point out to you the white fragility here. The fragility of a white woman allegedly receiving some form of seductive action from a black person then justifies lynching him because you were uncomfortable. Oh, how dare he, right? Meanwhile, if you live in New York, I know Michael is from New York. Oh my God. New York City, these men, they're relentless with their catcalling. It don't matter what you look like, what color you are, what clothes you have on. They're like loud and obnoxious about it too. God, I lived in New York for 2 years and I was coming from Seattle. I was taken aback by how blatant these men are with the, "Hey, baby, show me your ass. Hey, baby, let's get it. Oh, hey, mama, do this and that and it." Oh, that is totally New York. That's New York City. That was Brooklyn. Every time I went out in Brooklyn, there was all, you could have a bingo card. Cat calls, shit in the streets, homeless guy somewhere talking to himself on the subway. You could just check them off. Okay, so to be in Mississippi, my point here, and is for this woman to then go, oh my God, oh, he said, "Bye, baby, get him." Okay, And what they did to this boy, a group of white men went out, looked for him, used Carolyn to point him out, and then took him in the middle of the night into the middle of a forest and beat him to shit. They tied him to a fan, the fan of a cotton gin, I think it was. They tied him to the fan of a cotton gin. His body is like hanging halfway out, submerged underwater. And they beat him to shit and then shot him in the head. Okay? They tortured him for hours and then shot him in the head. This picture above me, that's what his body looked like. And his mom wanted an open casket funeral so that she could show the world, not just America, but people in other countries, what white people do to black people here. She had a public wake where anybody could come in and see her child and see what they did to her child. And that's what they did to him. He doesn't even look anything similar to how he looks in this other photo when he was alive. And part of the logic of this resistance movement is it's not just about the fact that he said, oh, bye, baby, or something like that. It's about making a statement. It's about reinforcing the norm. It's about sending a message and telling black people that they need to know their fucking place here. And their place here is you are beneath me. You don't get the same rights as me. You don't get the same privileges as me. You're not as human as me. You will never be. And just because you can get the Supreme Court to say it doesn't mean jack shit, because look at what we can still do and still get away with. So even though there was a trial, even though there was overwhelming evidence, this white man, the owner of this grocery store, gets the privilege of being able to sit with his two boys in a courtroom as they go to trial, and they're acquitted by an all-white jury. Okay? And there's Carolyn Bryant right there, sitting right next to her husband, who allegedly committed the lynching with another man, even though there's some evidence that suggested it wasn't just two people. It was like a whole crowd of white men. Sorry, Brian, I don't know how long your request was sitting there. I didn't get the opportunity to open up I usually cancel the wait list thing or the waiting room thing or whatever it is. So I have to admit people today. You'll have to forgive me. There's Carolyn Bryant. Now, in 2018, here's this woman, Carolyn Bryant, who then admits pretty much on her deathbed, because there's nothing you can do. This woman is basically like a living pile of dust. You know that little crusty old tadpole looking thing from SpongeBob? 2008. It's a typo, not 2018, but 2008. You know that crusty looking old woman who looks like a burnt tadpole in SpongeBob? That's basically how Carolyn Bryant looked when she finally admitted that she lied. Yeah, it was 2008. You're right. So it's a typo. I'll try to fix that. There's another typo that Michael brought to my attention around a state name that I need to go back. I think it was Arkansas. I need to go back and fix it. I just haven't. I've been juggling. Sorry. But yes, it was 2008 when Carolyn Bryant finally admitted, as a crusty old woman, you know that young boy, Emmett Till, I was lying. No shit, she was lying. Everybody knows she was lying. What 14-year-old? First of all, even if a 14-year-old did that, how does that justify all of this shit? So now she gets away with it because are you going to put this crusty old woman in prison? I would have. Oh, okay. Reopen the case. Throw the book at her. Let her rot, even though she's probably already rotting. And she died. She's gone. Good riddance. But here we have it where now she was lying. So now just on an accusation, a white woman knows that her words are powerful enough to take life from other black people merely by the words she speaks. And it isn't just Carolyn Bryant who does this, because we also have like repeated video evidence of like white women who go running down the street making these hysterical calls to the police. Oh my God, help me! The black man is trying to hurt me! Ah, get here quick! And then on the video footage, the black guy is like literally sitting there like, lady, what the fuck is wrong with you? It's because they know that they can get away with these kinds of things, that they then have the audacity to do them. Marilyn says, good, quote unquote, good Christian women wanted into heaven, so she had to confess. Yeah, just because you can confess I don't think that's going to get you through the pearly gates. Hell, if anything, if God exists and God is a just God, then put Emmett Till's black ass right at the gate to go, hey, bitch. Bloop. No, you don't. Remember me? Oh, yeah, you do. I know you do. Uh-huh. I was waiting on this moment. God, anyway. Okay, so the lynching of Emmett Till is like the catalyst here. It's the catalyst for what would eventually become the civil rights movement in full-fledged motion. Because it's one thing when you have like ongoing battles to push for desegregation, things are slowly starting to get dismantled, white people are resisting, all of that is just kind of slow and abstract in a way, right? But the moment that you have a death of an innocent, that kind of symbolically becomes more than just sending a message to black people. It becomes the thing that black people then need to kick themselves into motion to make every act of pushing for equal rights and equal citizenship and fair treatment in society that much more in your face. So I want to show you two videos, okay? This first video, we're going to go over time here. If you have a question at any point in time, you're welcome to interrupt outside of the videos. Please be respectful. But I want to show you these videos. The first video here is around 5 minutes. The next video is around 12 minutes. We're going to go over. So if you have a question, if you want to ask your question, just interrupt when I'm talking. You're perfectly fine. You're allowed to do that. Okay. But I want to show you this because here's how Dr. Martin Luther King, in his 20s, then steps into a position of civil rights activism and leadership. Essentially, what triggered it is the lynching of Emmett Till. Check this out, and then we'll talk about it.
Rosa Parks is a local civil rights activist who boards a city bus and is arrested when she refuses to obey the rules of segregation.
You gotta remember how humiliating that was. You put money in the front, your little nickel or dime, whatever we had to pay, and you go to the back, to the side door. And you're sitting in your seat that's assigned to you. Even if I'm sitting back there, that the bus driver and the whites in Alabama had the power to tell me to get up because dare not sit while a white man is standing.
When Rosa Parks, that December evening, is asked to get up out of her seat, she says she thinks about Emmett Till. Till was the young man from Chicago who'd come to Mississippi to visit his uncle and was lynched for making a comment to a white woman.
The two men who murdered Till have just been acquitted, causing outrage in black communities across the Deep South. Activists in Montgomery, Alabama organized an anti-segregation protest, a one-day boycott of the city bus system to begin after Rosa Parks' arrest. It elicits an immediate response.
We expect the city bus lines of Montgomery and the people of Montgomery to continue to obey all segregation laws as written. And as long as I am police commissioner of the city of Montgomery, I intend to follow this course.
Initially, the boycott was scheduled to last one day. And it was only after they saw the success of it that they began thinking about, well, we can sustain this. And I don't think they realized how difficult that would be.
What they were doing was almost doing a power map and looking at sort of what tools do we have at our disposal? How is the structure and the system set up in a way that needs us?
75% of the bus riders are black. A total boycott is an economic threat that cannot be ignored.
There's a huge mass meeting at Holt Street Baptist Church, and it's at that meeting where the community makes the decision to go forward and turn this one-day boycott into a kind of extended boycott.
The movement also chooses its leader, a 26-year-old minister who's determined to keep the protests going.
Dr. Martin Luther King.
Part of how Montgomery's black community sustains a boycott is because they organize this massive, incredibly impressive carpool system. They set up 40 pickup stations around town. They organize thousands and thousands of rides a day.
Taxi cabs and carpools are pressed into service as blacks in Montgomery continue to boycott the buses week after week, month after month.
These are people who have been engaged both in kind of grassroots resistance and in politics around civil rights for decades. But also, they had a very astute understanding of what it would take in order for change to happen. Power conceives nothing lightly.
The carpool and all we have done in this struggle continues.
The boycott continues over a year, costing Montgomery City bus lines $3,000 a day in lost revenue. White segregationists react with violence.
I remember doing the Montgomery bus boycott, moving out the Klans would get on their horses and ride through, and try to intimidate people.
Yet King and the leaders of the SCLC stay committed to face any intimidation with nonviolence.
Part of his commitment to nonviolence is a commitment to not letting white people determine the terms of their interaction and the power in that. We often focus, when we talk about nonviolent direct action, on just the peacefulness of it. But part of it is not wanting your opponent to get to set the terms of your engagement. There's nothing passive about it.
We must get in our hearts that it is possible to be courageous and yet nonviolent.
While the boycott keeps up public pressure in the streets, in the courts, civil rights organizers are pushing for change at the national level.
When Rosa Parks is arrested, she is represented by a young lawyer in Alabama named Fred Gray.
Gray takes the case all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And 381 days after it began, the bus boycott ends in victory when the court rules that segregation on public transportation is unconstitutional.
Okay, so here, I want to point something out to you because at the end of the last lecture, I introduced this concept to you called interest convergence, right? And the concept of interest convergence, for those of you who aren't familiar, I described as one in which the social justice, the racial equality that everyone is championing for only comes about when those interests intersect with the interests of the dominant group. In this case, that's going to be white people. And during this time period, the black people who engaged in the Montgomery bus boycott didn't know it at the time, but they were leveraging that power of interest convergence. And the interest convergence that you can see here is that when Rosa Parks was treated the way she was on the Montgomery busing system, and they were told that everybody has to respect the segregation laws, black people then took it upon themselves, to take their own money and then to funnel that money into their own carpooling system, which effectively replaced the Montgomery busing system. And it was run almost in an honor system. There was no Uber, no Lyft, no let me see your driver's license, let me see your ID, let me make sure I know who you are. It was literally just, if you're black, if you have a car, we trust you because we're all in this together. And we're going to go and we're going to make sure that everybody gets to their job, gets their groceries, gets everything that they need. And what ends up happening is the Montgomery busing system loses so much money that it's forced into a position where if it wants to survive, if it wants to sustain, it has to meet the needs of the Black people. So now their interests converge. Now the Montgomery busing system is forced to take down its racial segregation policies so that Black people can ride the buses as equals. Don't you see how that works? So yet again, we have another example in history that adds credibility to this theoretical perspective we're calling interest convergence here, that I then put on you to think about in a philosophical way. How could you manipulate the conditions of this relationship in order to produce the outcome you want? Is if you know that it doesn't have to take forever in order to get the justice, the equality. It just requires you to manipulate conditions in such a way that interests converge. How might we do this in 2026? Avery, do you have a question?
Yes. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. So when you were talking earlier about the specific wording of Brown 2, and I can't remember the exact wording
all
of
deliberate
it.
Speed.
Yeah, all deliberate speed. Do you think that that was the intention? Because do you think the intention was to leave it loose enough for the interpretation to be whenever they feel like it?
I believe so. Again, I'm going to preface with this is an opinion, not a fact. So I'm happy to be wrong. I'm happy to be proven wrong. During the 1950s, it would be reasonable to say that the members who are sitting on the bench of the Supreme Court are culturally conservative. And even though they have an obligation to preserve the Constitution, and the Constitution in a legal sense, then even though they're forced to rule in favor of the NAACP, they then use or issue a ruling with language that says desegregate with all deliberate speed, which does, in essence, kind of leave room for subjective interpretation. I do think that's intentional, but that is my opinion, and I'm happy to be proven wrong.
Got it.
Yep. Okay. So back to my point here about interest convergence, right? Is you can see that, again, these people don't have the hindsight, the privilege of being in the future to look back at the past and the accumulation of all of the historical data and records that we have to then craft together a critical weak point in what we're calling systemic racism here. But I'm giving you that answer. That answer is that if history is consistently showing you that social justice is only produced when these conditions are met, then in order to anticipate these conditions being met in the future, you then know, how can I manipulate these conditions in order to produce the outcome of fairness, justice, equality, inclusion, etc.? You now have the recipe for being able to employ this in real time. It just requires you to get rid of your ego. And I'll leave that conversation for another time. Okay. Now, excuse me, not this video. In this next video, I want to show you this video. Again, we're going over, we're going to go over here. We have roughly 4 or 5 more slides, but this video is about 12 minutes long. But it historically connects to what we're talking about. So I apologize for cutting into the Q&A time. Okay. But recently there haven't been many questions asked. So hopefully you don't mind that we have a few more slides to go. Anyway, I want to show you this video because, again, consistent with what's happening here with white resistance to Supreme Court rulings, to Black people getting incrementally more fair inclusion in society, is now in Little Rock, Arkansas, you have the desegregation of a school yet again where Black students want to come in and go and attend, and white people are pissed off, and it causes a national uproar. Let's watch this video, and then on the back end we'll talk about it.
Dwight D. Eisenhower, do solemnly swear.
I, Dwight D. Eisenhower, do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of the President of the United States.
Eisenhower's presidency is a really important one in the history of race relations in America.
As we move through the mid to late 1950s, the period he becomes president, America had come out of World War II.
Pause 1 second. Sorry.
Feeling confident and powerful, had conquered fascism. Incomes were increasing, a growing middle class. Lots of things were getting better for a number of people, which is in part also why the civil rights movement is so important, because there were things that weren't getting better for a whole number of people.
Eisenhower grew up in Abilene, Kansas. He had no black friends.
There we go.
He then went on to a career in the segregated U.S. military. So in a sense, he really had no notion of what it was like to be black in America.
What we have to consider about Eisenhower is that Eisenhower doesn't really understand the lengths that the South will go to preserve segregation.
He wasn't looking to make civil rights his main issue in the 1950s. He wanted to build the interstate highway system. He wanted to get the economy humming. He wanted to help corporate America. And suddenly civil rights is dumped on his desk daily through his 8-year presidency.
Dwight Eisenhower might not have been interested in claiming civil rights as his own issue, but civil rights was interested in Eisenhower. And it came to him in 1957 at the town of Little Rock, Arkansas. This was an explosive moment in the modern civil rights movement.
In order to understand Little Rock, you have to start in 1954 with Brown v. Board of Education. Now, Brown v. Board of Education rules that separate but equal is in fact not equal and ends segregation in education. This becomes the law of the land.
It's one of the most important decisions of the 20th century, and it would shape race relations in America for the rest of the century. It was a direct existential threat to the Southern way of life. Eisenhower wanted things to go slow. He feared that all of his Southern friends would stand up and say, this is an outrage, this is an invasion of our state's rights, this is going to set off racial conflict, this is going to be destabilizing. And as it turned out, Eisenhower was right.
Eisenhower really didn't want to be involved in trying to solve the country's racial problems. But in assessing the situation, Eisenhower was animated by the fear of chaos if he did not bring the full authority of the federal government to play in this particular crisis.
Now, increasingly, what we end up seeing is that schools become contested spaces of segregation and inequality. And this is the case in Little Rock, Arkansas. Little Rock prides itself on being essentially a moderate city where people have gotten along. But things are very different when we get into the intimate space of the school. Now, predictably, Brown v. Board of Education, it creates an explosive situation where 9 black children go into a situation where white segregationists, a white mob, have essentially gotten together to conspire to prevent these black children from coming into the schools.
So the Little Rock Nine are a collection of young people, and that's really important to know, young people, who were selected through a vetting process by the local NAACP to challenge or frankly, to be the guinea pigs to integrate Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas.
Well, at this moment, the governor of Arkansas, a man named Orville Faubus, who actually was a World War II veteran who had served in Europe while Eisenhower was the supreme commander. He stepped into the mix. Orville Faubus smelled a political advantage here. He figured, I'm going to get on the side of the segregationists because that's good politics here in Arkansas. Orville Faubus ordered the Arkansas National Guard to come to the school, to stand guard. And their role, allegedly, was to keep the peace. But in fact, their role was to make it impossible for the Little Rock Nine, the 9 black students, to come into the school.
There must have been 1,000 Arkansas National Guardsmen. And their job was to keep us out. So the first day, we were barred. We didn't go into class. There were people who wanted to lynch us.
They're not simply met with armed forces or local police. They are met with a mob, and they are met with violence. What the mob is doing is ensuring that the racial hierarchy of Little Rock, Arkansas is upheld. And it escalates. It escalates and it continues to grow and grow and grow.
So Eisenhower is certainly being brought up to speed, and I'm sure he's being shown the movie clips or the film clips.
And now Eisenhower began to see the images, and there are some searing photographs of white students, their faces contorted in hatred and anger, screaming at Elizabeth Eckford and a few of the other students who were there that day trying to get into the school. So this was an explosive situation, and Eisenhower was profoundly distressed to see it. Eisenhower loathed the idea of using force, and he was seeking a way out. So he invited the governor to come to see him up in Newport.
Eisenhower leaves the meeting thinking that he's convinced Faubus and that Faubus is quite rational and will go home and, this all will be nipped in the bud. And what happens? Oh, Faubus does the exact opposite. He says, all right, I'll withdraw the Arkansas National Guard, but now I'm gonna leave it in the hands of local police, and I'm gonna leave it in the hands of the mob. And so the crisis escalates even further, because now the mob is unchecked. Now they are even more vicious, they are even more dangerous.
Eisenhower was put in a corner. Orville Faubus pushed him into a corner, and that's not a place you want to put Dwight Eisenhower, especially when he's president. Orville Faubus, he said, we'll see what happens when those students come to school now. Now that there's no soldiers there to look after them. I sure hope there isn't any violence, he said. And I sure hope nobody gets shot. What Orville Faubus was doing was ginning up the hatred in Little Rock.
Eisenhower found himself without much of an option, that the governor in Arkansas was refusing his authority, and if he let that happen, so many other Southern governors would then have the precedent to do the same thing. And Eisenhower wasn't going to let that happen. It would be chaos, and it's not hyperbolic to say it could lead to a second Civil War.
Now was the moment Eisenhower had to act.
We are a nation in which laws, not men, are supreme. Mob rule can not be allowed to override the decisions of our courts.
He decides to send in the 101st Airborne to enforce the law. This was one of America's proudest, most storied military units. It had liberated Europe, and that was now going to play a role in defending the Constitution in Little Rock.
Here we have the President of the United States saying, I am fully prepared to use the full force of my office, of the federal government, in order to uphold and enforce the law of the land. We haven't seen these kinds of deployment of troops used since Reconstruction.
We had a real show of force, soldiers that were rang all around the school. We had helicopter overhead. When we walked into class, we were surrounded by a cadre of paratroopers. They took the entire United States Army to get me into high school. And it made you feel great. You felt like, you know, 1 week, here we had a mob of people who were trying to keep us out, and that we were now being able to go into the school with the support of the United States Army. I'm the first African-American to graduate from Little Rock Central High School, May of 1958.
That was very heartening in Arkansas to suddenly have Eisenhower, the hero of World War II, on the side of young people integrating Central High.
We received the Congressional Gold Medal, the 9 of us, and the person who presented it to us was President Clinton, an Arkansan to another Arkansan.
40 years later, we know there are still more doors to be opened wider, doors we have to keep from being shut again now. 40 years later, frankly, we know we're bound to come back where we started. After all the weary years and silent tears, after all the stony roads and bitter rods, the question of race is in the end still an affair of the heart.
And so we wind up with this extraordinary story of a president who was not prepared to deal with the crisis of race in America, didn't really understand it, but the crisis came to him and found him.
By sending in the 101st Airborne, Eisenhower sends a signal to those states that would try and defy the federal government that, oh no, I'm going to preserve the Union, I'm going to uphold the law, and I'm going to knock down your disorder. It just so happens that he does it in defense of civil rights, and it's this moment that helps him understand what is at stake in the struggle for the civil rights movement.
Okay, excuse me. Okay, so to the person named Xenia who was trying to get into the session, I unfortunately I didn't admit you because we were watching the video, but if you would like to come in now, now's your opportunity. Every time I click out of the video, it pauses, and I just don't want to do that for the audience. So if you're still listening, if you want to jump back into the Zoom session, I will admit you. I'm sorry that I didn't take down the waiting room for today's session. Now, back to the lecture here. The point I want to make here is that you're seeing a few things. You're seeing, first of all, the manifestation of white conservatives' investment in racial segregation on camera, on video. The world can see it. America can see it. And what becomes very clear is on the screen, those angry white people are the bad guys. What, hold on, whoops. See, here's what happens when I don't get rid of all my stuff. Okay. Okay. So what happens is everybody can see, it's very clear that the bad guys are not the black people. The bad guys aren't the black kids. The bad guys are these angry white people. It almost becomes so profound that, like, to people's understanding, that's what the racist is. This is what a racist looks like. This is what racism is. And in the minds of many laypersons moving forward, all the way into arguably 2026, when you hear the word racist, it kind of evokes the emotions that come out of seeing these angry people. They're deliberate, they're intentional, they're full of hate. It's not accidental. And what's happening here is for Dwight D. Eisenhower, in seeing what are objectively the bad guys on screen, it becomes clear that even his upbringing, some of his own cultural values, weren't actually the correct values. They weren't really the right ways to go about living. And it's very clear that, like, if you're going to side with these people, you must be the bad guy. Okay? So Dwight D. Eisenhower has a unique change of heart that he's then bringing in World War II veterans and military to come in and make sure that these kids can get the right to go to school, and reinforce that, like, these kids are just going to school. Like, holy shit, why do you want to hang somebody for wanting to learn in a classroom? Right? But again, the vitriol here is that the political motives, or movement rather, of Dwight D. Eisenhower begins to inspire other politicians too, other white politicians. Okay? That's where we get to this place where now you're starting to see white politicians who are going, holy shit, politically, like, do you want to be aligned with these assholes? Like, they're clearly the bad guys. Like, do you think it's a good idea to go and move in favor of these jackasses? Yeah, probably not. So here's John F. Kennedy, who I would argue is one of those fundamental believers in the philosophical, political, and social meanings of what it means to be American. He believes in fundamental rights, freedoms, civil rights, equal opportunity, and he can clearly see that as a Democrat, it's kind of necessary for him to move on behalf or in favor of expanded civil rights as a president moving forward. Okay? So JFK, very early on as president, was always concerned. By the time we get to the 60s, he's concerned about all of the violence that's going on here.
How about you?
When you come into session, please mute your mic. If you have a question, please raise your hand first. Thanks. So he's concerned, and politically speaking, he just doesn't want to align himself with these assholes, right? So it's very clear that if he's going to be like, I am an American president, I am an American leader, I'm a patriot, I believe in what this nation has to offer, I believe in its values, I believe in its principles, and I'm going to move in that favor, then he's kind of like aiding in civil rights. But this is starting to piss off all of these white conservatives, because up until this point, the Democrats have been conservative. So why is JFK, who is a representative of the Democrat Party, which should be conservative, is now moving in favor of all of these niggers having expanded rights? Why do they get more protections? Why do they get to go to school? Why do they get to go into the same restaurants? Why do they get to go and move into your neighborhood? Fuck this. And so then here's JFK, who's issuing executive order 11063, basically saying in more sophisticated, still less sophisticated than 2026, but more sophisticated language than FDR, he's basically saying government agencies have to discontinue discriminatory policies and practices, specifically in federal supported housing too. You have to stop doing this thing where you're consolidating all of the government benefits that we're generating, that we're giving to these American people, and then you're only giving them to white people. If you haven't seen any of my reels, which hopefully you have, I've demonstrated time and time again that from the time of the creation of SNAP benefits all the way into 2026, white women have been the highest demographic to receive SNAP benefits, but then just any kind of welfare benefits since the history of America, in the history of America, right? So here's JFK, who's pushing back on this idea that like all of these benefits just get to go to white people. Okay. And then he's naming his vice president, Lyndon B. Johnson, to chair this initiative to desegregate federally supported housing, to make sure that black people get extended but equal protections in American life, and to make sure that America as a nation actually lives up to the values that it proclaims for itself. Okay? So what happens here, it's very interesting, and we've seen this before, is you already have violence, you already have white conservatives who are pissed off, you have people who are like, they're ready to start killing Emmett Till isn't necessarily going to be where it stops. Okay? So now here's JFK, who's essentially sticking his neck out as the president who's helping all the niggers. He's helping them. And he's doing it on behalf of the Democrat Party. And if you're a core conservative, are you in support of this? Hell no. So what does he do? Well, he goes on a parade, and then somebody kills him. Now, this is going to be where I am going to distinguish my opinion from fact. I will always do this. I don't like spreading misinformation. If somebody comes back up and says, hey, you were wrong about this statement, hey, if I need to publicly correct myself, I will do that. I don't have this ego that everybody's got in 2026 when I say this. But it is my opinion that you have yet again, like Lincoln, a president who is moved to lead the nation by his conscience, by, let's say, in alignment with his firm belief in American principles and values that we regard to be essential and fundamental. And on the outside, he's interpreted as helping black people, helping the niggers. So you kill him. And they kill him again. Okay? So in the midst of all of this vitriol, where you have a president who's moving on behalf of a political party that has historically always been conservative, and he's helping the niggers, it shouldn't necessarily be surprising. And I say this saying, look through the eye of history, okay? In retrospect, it shouldn't be surprising that a guy who sticks himself out this way politically finds himself in a similar position that Lincoln found himself in. That's not to gloat on JFK. I'm not trying to piss on his grave. I'm not trying to tarnish his name. I am telling you, hear the nuance. I am telling you to look through the eye of history, and you will find, if you have been following this class since the very beginning, it shouldn't be surprising to you that this ended up happening. We've been talking about American culture, the politics, the inclination to violence, all of the patterns and themes that we have seen throughout the history of the timeline of the United States, such that when we get to this forward, progressive-leaning president that is again moving contrary to a historically white supremacist party, he's getting killed. Now, you might say, well, FDR didn't get assassinated and he passed all these social safety net programs. And yeah, because all Americans were struggling. So at that point, when white people are in need, they don't really care who else it's helping. Yeah, they want all those benefits to go to other white people, but they don't really care that it's trickling over to black people right now. They want to get out of the position they're in. So FDR is not necessarily going to be assassinated, right? Okay. But Kennedy always played a deliberate and active role in supporting racial equality, and one could say that that eventually led to his assassination. I'm not justifying it. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it should have happened. I'm saying if you look through the eye of history, you really shouldn't be surprised. Okay? But even then, that's not going to stop LBJ. Because after JFK is assassinated, LBJ is sworn into office. He becomes president of the United States. But he was already in favor of expanded civil rights anyway. So what the fuck are you going to think that just because the other guy got axed, that suddenly he's going to change his mind and backtrack? Politically, that just makes him out to be weak. So he's leaning in. And LBJ doesn't have a perfect track record of like being completely without his own anti-black racial sentiments and values too. But again, looking at what's happening in Arkansas, it becomes very clear, like, do you align with all of these angry assholes? Yeah, no. No, you don't. So it's kind of like, it should go, it's kind of second nature for LBJ to just go, you know what? No, we're moving forward and we're going to sign into law. We're going to lobby to sign into law another civil rights bill. Civil Rights Act of 1964. Okay, if you've been following this class, you know that this is not the first and only civil rights bill. We have civil rights bills that go back to the 1800s. Okay, but this is, to my knowledge anyway, the most pivotal civil rights bill in American history. Okay, because now you have LBJ. He's a Southerner. He's a Democrat. He's a white man. He should absolutely be against civil rights. He isn't. Okay, so only 4 days after taking office, after the assassination of JFK, he's already in support of an expanded civil rights bill, the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So what is that going to do for all of the white people here? White people are pissed off. Well, look, the Democrat Party, it's getting overrun here. We're not Dixiecrats anymore. We're not white supremacists anymore. We're outnumbered by all of these forward-thinking progressives who are undermining our culture norms and our way of life. They're undermining this. So the Democrat Party is moot. It's dead. And if you consider yourself to be a conservative, well, here's the Republican Party that's been saying it wanted to make itself lily white for like the last 30 years now. Let's start voting Republican. Because on the Republican end, which we'll be talking about next week, the Republicans have been saying, no, America's done enough for black people. There's no need for another civil rights bill. There's no need for expanded civil rights. We've done enough. So why are the Democrats trying to push this? This is what attracts all of the white supremacists, all of the conservatives to start voting hard for the Republican Party. And all of the people who are progressive leaning and were already kind of moving into the Democrat Party, eventually outnumbering those white supremacist conservatives, they start voting Democrat. And this is where you get the political party value switch. Okay? And I want to use that language, and I want to be distinct and deliberate about that language. It is a value switch. Glinda, do you have a question?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. It was an accident.
Okay. Okay, so people often say, for short, the political party switch, but it's not like Democrats became Republicans and Republicans became Democrats officially. No, what happened was all of those white supremacists, all of the people who identified with the vitriolic, angry white people who were chasing down those black high schoolers in Little Rock, Arkansas, they all consolidated to the Republican Party because they felt like the Democrat Party no longer represented their fundamental beliefs and values. All of the progressive people who want more protections, more expanded civil rights, more equality in American society are the people who then had already been shifting away from the Republican Party and into the Democrat Party. So by the time you get to 1964, it's just the straw that breaks the camel's back. It's the catalyst. So now, essentially, the values switch, and they stay consistent. Over the course of like the next 30 years, conservatives, or the people who call themselves conservative, are now Republicans. And the people who are progressives are now Democrats. And the distinction between these two and their values is around the issue of civil rights. The fundamental rights and freedoms that other people, particularly non-white people, should have or are entitled to. That is what draws the line between these two. And this is why in 2026, you will then find that conservative identifying Republican voters, all of their core issues around this political philosophy is kick them out. They don't belong here. They don't get the same rights as me. Stop giving them welfare benefits. These people are lazy. Pick yourselves up by your bootstraps. The values haven't changed. The racial animosity and the sentiments haven't changed. Okay? So now reconcile that with Brandon Tatum, Xavier DeRusso, Tim Scott, whoever you want to, the minority of black people who align themselves with conservative political philosophies and ideas, and then you find them repeatedly like just protecting white supremacy, like blatantly so. This adds credibility to what I have been saying since I gained popularity on social media, is American conservatism is white supremacy politics. There's never been a time period in history where it has ever been anything other than white supremacy in political form. Okay, last slide here. And then with the last few minutes we have left, I'm so sorry, we'll do a Q&A, but our Q&As have been short. So you'll have to forgive me, but I wanted to do this one in one go. They want that red flower pollen. Okay. So I want to bring this back really quickly because at the end of the last lecture, we were talking about critical race theory and interest convergence. And one of the fundamental perspectives of critical race theory that you need to understand here, that I'm drawing strings between the timeline of US history here, okay, is you have to stop looking at racism as a behavioral anomaly. Okay. At the individual level, there are some forms of it that are anomalous. But you need to start looking at racism as a social norm. It permeates every aspect of our lives, including the mundane. Okay? It is a fundamental way of American life. It is a traditional way of American life. Our political system orients itself around racism. The people who align with their various political values in America are orienting themselves around that very same construct of racism. Who we hire, who we don't hire, who we pay, how much we pay them, why we pay them that much, why we value them, who we promote, who we fire. All of these things, whether intended or not, permeate some aspect of the culture of racism in American society. That when I can show you a race pattern disparity of unemployment rates by race, where Black people and Hispanic people are consistently the highest numbers on the board at all points in time in American history, and white people and Asians are the lowest at all points in time in American history, that you should then understand that it is not an accident. The history informs that. Now, whether you choose to recognize it or not, racism is a social norm. And when I'm saying this, do not hear me saying bigotry is a social norm. I've always been very clear that racism and bigotry are two very distinct things, and that everybody is racist. Not everybody is a bigot, but everybody, by virtue of having a racial identity, racialized experiences, racial perspectives, brings with them that racism wherever they go. So in essence, then, what you need to understand as we move forward into the new chapters and we're getting closer and closer to 2026, you need to understand that at all points in time, including what we anticipate in the future, challenging racism is challenging America. Whenever you're challenging racism, you're challenging America. Okay? Now, you're challenging America to be better. You're not undermining America. Let that be the distinction. But with the last few minutes we have left, I'm so sorry that I took all of this time. I usually don't go this long, okay? But I went this long today because I wanted to get to the political party switch. People have been asking about this for so long. They want to talk about it. They want to hear the context behind it. So I wanted to explain it to you. And with the last few minutes that we have left, if you have any questions, you're welcome to type them out. I can now see the IG live chat. You can unmute your mic if you're in the Zoom chat. Take it away. Are there any questions?
Hi, it's me again, Avery.
Yeah.
So going back even further, like almost immediately after Reconstruction, when the first sort of retaliatory efforts of white people started to happen. I think starting with the assassination of Lincoln, and I think that was 2 weeks after the Emancipation Proclamation was ratified and all that. Would you say that there was a concerted effort to reestablish slavery.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
We talk about all of this in great detail. You will have to find the lecture on my YouTube. This is an entire series we're doing. There's a lecture that explicitly names Reconstruction in the title. Anywhere where we're talking about Andrew Jackson, or no, not Andrew Jackson, excuse me, Andrew Johnson, who stepped into the presidency after Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. We go into great detail about his efforts to reconstruct slavery in a way that respects the Constitution, despite the 13th Amendment. Yes. Thank you for asking.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Someone asked, and I figured I'd just vocalize it on the IG live chat. They said, when did you start? We are live on IG at 4 p.m. every Sunday. Next Sunday is my birthday. I will be lecturing because I don't plan on doing anything really that major. But maybe you'll join me for a special birthday session. It won't be that special. It'll be par for the course. But same thing next Sunday. Every Sunday at 4. Okay. Somebody said Lincoln was an arch racist. I don't know what you mean by that. You'll have to explain that one. I'm not sure what you mean. Ayana says, happy birthday. I'm an August baby as well. Yeah. Leos. We're out here. I am August 16th. So yeah, Marilyn.
Okay, well, I'll go with everybody else. Happy birthday, early birthday anyways. There's been a lot of questions from people asking, why aren't we moving in the same way that the civil rights activists were moving back then on the pushback of everything that's going on? It's almost like it's just not there. And there's so many people I've seen ask that question, where are they? Who's doing what? Yes, we have lawyers that are fighting in Supreme Court, but there just doesn't seem like the movement is the same. Any particular reason why you would think that?
Yes. We're going to be talking about that in the weeks to come.
Okay.
Yes, because that explains how we get to 2026, where it looks like people are just kind of burnt out, tired. No, there's no million-man marches anymore. There's a reason. The short answer, just to satisfy, is that post party value switch, conservatives reshape their political platform. They move almost intentionally away from that angry, vitriolic, white, we want to hang you from a tree style of white supremacy that we could say is politically embodied by George Wallace. He was the governor of Alabama. And Ronald Reagan kind of starts to reshape American conservatism into this like suit and tie form of conservatism where it's a little more palatable, it's a little more covert racism. He still agrees with George Wallace and all of these other white supremacists, but he's just trying to be a little more sophisticated in distinguishing himself as objectively the bad guy, like these angry white people were doing. So we're going to get there, and we'll talk about how Reagan's legacy essentially cements a very harsh, punitive history that erodes all of the momentum, not all of it, but a lot of the momentum that was generated out of the civil rights era. We'll be talking about that in the weeks to come. I want to clarify for the person who asked, when are you live? When did you start? I said 4 p.m., but I did not specify the time zone. Somebody pointed that out. So I wanted to clarify vocally. I mean 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Okay. So I am in Los Angeles, California, maybe 20 minutes away from Santa Monica. Okay. So, yeah, 4 p.m. LA time, if that makes sense to you. So if you're on the East Coast, then that's 7 p.m. And if you're in Hawaii, then I think that's 1 p.m. But anywhere around there, I've had people from Australia who chime in, people from London who chime in. So it's been really interesting, but that's 4 p.m. PST. So I wanted to clarify. Michael B says, I saw a meme saying Anne Frank was publicized to say fascism is overt there and distract from Jim Crow and corporate fascism here. Oh, I don't know anything about that. I can't speak on that. I'm so sorry. Yeah, and you're welcome for another amazing class. Absolutely. The whole goal here, like I told you, is I want the people who are consistently listening, I want you to be able to look at what we're observing in 2026 and like not see it as like something you can't really understand. Like, you know where these things are coming from, but you can't explain it. So the goal here is, once you're able to see through the eye of history, you can't unsee it. And it's not a magic trick. It's not a mind trick. It's just information that you need to have access to. So that's what we're doing. And once we finish with this series, where we're going through the timeline of U.S. history, then I will pivot to another class for those of you who are interested around the evolutionary origins of race and racism. Yes, race, I mean that in the biological sense. So human racial differences, where do those emerge evolutionarily? And then cultures of racism, how those also socially and culturally evolve as well. This is a very anthropological course. It'll be the most anthropological course that you take from me, but I want you to have all of this information. So that's where we're going. But right now, we're just wrapping up the 1950s. Any other questions?
Can you compare Ahmaud Arbery and Emmett Till?
I do this, but I want to preface with, I am not trying to minimize either of these individuals' humanities. And I also want to acknowledge that the facts within each case, I do not know all of the facts within each case. Do I have opinions around it? Yes. And I'm willing to share those opinions. Ahmaud Arbery, to my memory, was a man who was out on a jog. And he was in a jog in, I believe, a white neighborhood. I'm welcome to be corrected on that. And he happened to run into a house that was under construction, looking around just to kind of see what was going on. Like, he was just curious to see what an unfinished house looked like. At least that's what I recall. And then he runs out of there and continues on his jog. And a white guy and his son both had shotguns and basically drove up in a truck and just shot him point blank in the street. There weren't any words exchanged, or very little words exchanged to my knowledge. And he was killed, and it was caught on camera. In Emmett Till's case, again, as we already covered, a white woman made false allegations and accusations that led to the lynching of a black boy. To some extent, we might say that they were both lynched, in the sense that it's very easy to understand that what motivated the killings of both of these people was race. And because it is hatred, because it is white people with, I guess, a sense of authority to handle other people's lives, we might classify Ahmaud Arbery as a lynching. However, I would distinguish the two in that lynching often involves torture. It often involves deliberate mutilation and brutalization, whereas Ahmaud Arbery was simply murdered, right? So the distinguish between the two is, even though we might make the argument that both cases are motivated by race, I would say one is a case of murder, the other is a lynching. But then there's a gray area between murder and lynching too, and I'm willing to acknowledge that. Does that satisfy your answer?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Ayana says, so sad because it matters why he was there, or it doesn't matter why he was there. He could have been counting grass. Yeah, exactly. And that's the case most of the time that black people are killed under quote unquote mysterious circumstances, is they were just being autonomously black. Somebody was threatened by it and decided that this other person's life didn't matter. So, Are there any other questions? I'm willing to go just a few minutes over, just because I took so long to get to where we are. But I mean, we're basically at the end here. Any other questions? Vernon, I know you just joined, so are you joining because you have a question, or?
Yeah, I did have a question. I was listening on the on your Instagram live, man. So but I was just joining the Zoom, because I did want to ask. I did kind of catch towards the end there how you were talking about how a lot of the party ideological switch kind of, did lead to this conservative ideology even seeping into albeit a very small part of our community, being the Black community, but it's still kind of seeped into it. And my question is, I mean, there's always been, I mean, any demographic has certain people that carry, I guess, its own cultural conservative values, if you kind of catch my drift there. So do you feel like there's any difference between a modern Black conservatism, like the people that you mentioned of Officer Tatum, the Candace Owens, the whomever, and a more traditional sense of Black conservatism that was truly rooted in Black values, like Black, what is it? What I'm looking for, and Black community, just Black pride, just Black, the protection of Black Black. Is it any real difference between how it relates to how Black conservatism, how it was looked at back then versus how it's looked at now, relative to how we go now?
No. Today, I would say in any American context, regardless of race, if we're talking about conservatism in the American context, we're talking about its implicit connection to white supremacist norms. In the sense of like Black people being like pro-Black family or like pro-Black businesses or like there's a sense of like you could characterize that as a form of Black conservatism, right? But I wouldn't use that language, because then that language becomes indistinguishable from the conservatism, which is you don't have the same rights as me, right?
Right. Okay.
So in that sense, I would say I would just call it being pro-Black. Some people might call it Pan-Africanism, which is a broader term that has other additional meanings. But I think being pro-Black, being nuclear family or like pro-nuclear family, there are some people who agree with that philosophy. There are some people who disagree with it. There are some people who, I don't think any of those things are distinguishing characteristics or hallmarks of American conservatism, right? Where American conservatism, what I'm talking about is preservation of the status quo. And preservation of the status quo means you don't get the same rights as me. We're going to kick you out and keep you out. All of our wealth gets consolidated to whiteness, and no one else gets to benefit from this at all. That's what we're calling conservatism, and it's the pursuit of those ends. I would like to say by any means, but there are some conservatives that are not violent, right? But by any means that are necessary to facilitate those outcomes, whether those means are peaceful or whether those means are extreme. Does that help to clarify?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely understand. Again, like the more traditional, I don't want to say the more traditional, but conservatism as it relates to how like we socially engage today. Like I saw a video today that was just like, hey, as a black person, if you were to be conservative, like what are you conserving? You're conserving like, a history of oppression within our community from a more dominant white society. So I definitely get it from that standpoint, but you did answer my question though about how you wouldn't necessarily call it, conservative. You might just call it like, hey, you're just pro-black. Like those particular ideologies or ideals are not exclusive to conservatism, which is,
Correct.
a great point. So thank you so much.
Yes, because among Black people who identify as conservative, you might go to Instagram and look at people like Jeffrey Mead. It doesn't have to be Brandon Tatum. Go look up a guy named Jeffrey Mead. Look up a guy named Xavier DeRusso. These are Black people who identify as conservative, and you'll notice that the hallmark of being a Black conservative is being anti-Black. Like a lot of the
Of
things that they're
course.
saying are generally just like bad faith criticisms of black people, black culture, black humanity, black morality, etc. It's a bastardization of that, and that those are the people who call themselves black conservative. And I wouldn't necessarily equate people who are pro-black and pro-preservation of black history and culture. I wouldn't call them conservative, because then it's almost like I'm kind of synonymizing them with these other like jackasses, and I just wouldn't equate the two. So I would just call it, you're pro-black. I wouldn't call it conservative unless you identify with these people whose cultural and political identity somehow centers around criticizing and hating black people and keeping out non-white people at all times. If that's you, then you're conservative. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. And I did have one quick follow-up question. Now, I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but I guess, how do you engage with those people who have these even if they're coming from black people, who have these anti-black ideals, who spew just, anti-black hatred? They're always going against the community, but they will self-identify as, oh, I'm pro-black because I have these same interests that you just mentioned. Like, hey, they are pro-black family, they are pro-black, business, they are, all of these different things. But at the same time, they also spew, again, they'll also say, well, they'll also say things like, if you don't want to be harassed by the police, then you should pull your pants up. Or they'll say, just like stuff like that. They definitely assimilate to a white culture, but because they may share some pro-black ideals or whatever, they believe in the concept of black capitalism, pro-black business, the nuclear black family, black Christianity, which I think is honestly in many ways different from white Christian nationalism. But they will share those ideals and then say, well, hey, I'm not a conservative in the negative way that you envision, because I still have all of these pro-black.
No, they're just pro-black conservatives. Yes, I would call those people pro-black conservatives. Which, at the end of the day, the net outcome is they're not really pro-black, even though they identify as pro-black, but they're still black conservatives. So the conservative name is appropriate in that context. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Randy.
Yeah. All right. So I suppose that's it. Again, apologies, but not apologies for going over. I really just wanted to get the party switch in there because so many people chime in, they ask about it. But we're going to continue this. We're going all the way into 2026. Okay. So next week, I think we're jumping knee deep into the 60s, the 1960s, a little bit of the 70s, and what that means for America moving forward. But we'll go ahead and wrap it up here. Thank you so much for participating this Sunday. I hope to see you next week. Yeah, we'll do a little special birthday session. Ayana asks, remind me where the lectures are archived. So you can find the videos to these lectures on YouTube, on my YouTube channel. Go to the link in my bio, find my YouTube page. If you want access to the slides and the scans for the reading, you can go to my Patreon. You can access them for free. You're welcome to financially support me, but if you don't want to do that, you're not obligated to. Okay. All right, everybody. I will see you next Sunday. Maybe we'll have a session over a slice of cake or something. All right. Yeah, click the link that Michael just shared. But all right, everybody, take care. All right. See you next week.